Hey, how you doing? My name is David Duford, owner and founder of buylifeinsuranceforburial.com, where I help people like you with their life insurance needs. And today's topic of discussion is the ultimate guide to purchasing a cremation policy. So most likely you're here watching this video because you're looking for more information on how cremation policies work, and you're just trying to do your due diligence to figure out what kind of cremation policy would work best for someone in your particular circumstances. So let's get started and find out what that would be. So overview of today's topics. We're first going to introduce you to myself formally as well as my company. Then we're going to actually define what a cremation policy is, and then go into why people buy cremation policies to begin with. And then we'll also make sure to answer what costs are customary for a cremation. There's a multitude of answers here. We'll make sure to cover those as well. And we'll make sure to discuss the difference between a full service and a direct cremation. And we're going to talk about who offers cremation policies. There are different kind of organizations that do so, and hopefully you'll be able to know what your options are. And then we'll talk about how life insurance can be used in in cremation pre-planning when it comes to using final expense policies, multi-year paid-up policies, and single-pay policies. And then I'll give you my final thoughts on which particular cremation plan would work best under certain circumstances, and then we'll take it from there. So my name is David Duford. I am the owner and founder of buylifeinsuranceforburial.com. I've been licensed as a life insurance agent since 2011 and have helped over 3,000 people across the country with their different kinds of final expense and life insurance needs. I'm also a published author, two books, in fact. The most relevant to you would be called The Official Guide to Buying Final Expense Insurance. It's a quick, easy read to help consumers figure out what kind of life insurance is best suited for final expense reasons. I'm also a life insurance agency owner. I work with hundreds of agents around the country to help train them to become successful final expense agents in their own communities, to help people face-to-face with their life insurance needs. And last but not least, I am married, and fourth kid is on the way as the filming of this video. So let's answer the main question at hand. What exactly is a cremation policy? So let me go ahead and define this for you. A cremation policy is an agreement between the client, that's you, and the servicing organization to provide the elements of a cremation at a predetermined price. So for example, you walk into, most commonly used, a funeral home. You decide on what it is that you exactly want in that cremation service. A price is drawn up, and then in exchange for locking those prices in, you purchase a cremation policy to cover your final expenses and the fact that you were to pass away. Again, at the benefit of having locked in prices with whatever funeral service that you're using. So typically, a cremation policy is funded using two different methods. The first method is to use a cash payment. Now this cash payment can be paid over time. This cash payment can be paid right up front. The second option is to use a life insurance product, where the life insurance product provides some level of permanent protection in case, well, not in case, but when you pass away, for an affordable premium, no matter when death occurs. Now, cremation policies typically provide peace of mind to individuals and their family, knowing the expenses are covered and planning has been taken well in advance, taken care of well in advance. So a lot of people do cremation policies. Perhaps you're in the same boat because you've lived through a death and you've seen the kind of toll it took on a family, and you want to make sure that you plan in advance of what exactly you want so that your bereaved doesn't come in and try to figure out with very little evidence of what you wanted, how you want your final funeral arrangements to go. So people are really motivated by a cremation policy because they like to spell out what it is that they want well in advance. And truly, they also want to make sure it's funded. Part of problems that occur at death are who pays for what. Many families don't have a lot of money, and it's up to them to come up with the finances in many cases to take care of final expenses. And this sort of thing causes unending levels of drama. If you have several kids and nobody can agree to how much each should pay, it can leave everlasting familial problems. So planning this stuff ahead of time is actually a very good thing. So into that, kind of built into this particular question of the importance of a cremation policy. Let's talk about why people buy a cremation policy. There's a couple of different reasons why people find it important. I think the number one reason comes to peace of mind. It's just having those particular issues wrapped up ahead of time so that you don't have to worry about them, so that everything is just where it should be. You don't have to be in a position where you may not have some sort of plan in and you have to let your loved ones figure out what you want. And part of that is also maintaining control of final wishes. Sometimes, I don't know if you've had this, I've certainly talked to my clients about it, you've had family members where they cannot envision cremating their mother or cremating their father. It is almost religious in opposition to what their desires are. Whereas the person of your age wants to be cremated, has specific reasons why. And by all accounts, after all, it's your body. You should do however it is you please with taking care of those final expenses. So there could be and if you don't plan that, you may have to just be at their mercy of somebody who doesn't want what you want. And so planning ahead of time really counters this concern where you may be in a circumstance where you don't get your final wishes. So planning always gives you more control than not planning. Also, removing burden from decision making from loved ones. The flip side to the loved ones that are zealous in their opposition to your desires are the ones that shoulder a burden, that don't know what to do with you because they never really broach the subject. A lot of family members are coy when it comes to your final demise and what it is that you want. It's a conversation no child wants to have with their parent. Although it is something that should happen, in many cases it never does happen because death has a way of taking us suddenly. So it's best to plan this stuff out well in advance so that this burden can be removed from the kids. Because you don't want to put them in a position where they regret making a decision that they didn't have to. Perhaps they really wanted to bury you, but they just couldn't afford it. Or maybe they just didn't see the reason to spend all that money, and they second guess themselves because this conversation wasn't had. So again, planning comes through as being the most resourceful path to go down to make sure that these details are taken care of. And that all goes with the assurance of having the plan paid for in advance. Money circumstances change for people. Just because you've reached retirement and you've saved prudently doesn't mean there won't be another economic downturn. And that may adjust and affect your decisions on what you will and won't purchase. So having a plan, having a policy that funds it or paying outright cash for it, again, goes back to that peace of mind. Making sure this thing is paid for in advance and no corners have to be cut, and making sure your wishes are maintained as you want. So in this section, we're going to talk about the cost of cremation. And this cost can vary wildly based on what your final wishes actually are. So we're going to pull up a website, and it's called the NFDA, National Funeral Directors Association. They keep tabs on what the average funeral and cremation costs are. And we're going to go into a breakdown on a direct cremation as well as a full service cremation so you can better understand what really kind of financial outlay you're looking at and what it's going to have to eventually result in. And I'm going to, after all this, I'm going to tell you a little story about my grandfather so you can better understand what it's like in actuality as to what to expect. So right now we're at National Funeral Directors Association website, nfda.org. We're looking at statistics of cremation costs. So what we're looking at right here is the average cost for a funeral. We're just going to skip past this since we're talking about cremation. And let's talk about what the average costs are as well as the items that are included in a cremation. So what we're looking at on the left here in this column is 2017 numbers. This is a collection of the typical customary aspects of a cremation according to the NFDA and what you're going to end up paying for each element. As I scroll down here, you'll see the median cost here is $6,260. Now this is a funeral with a viewing and cremation. It's important that you understand that the cost you're seeing here is for a full service funeral. Now some people will opt to have what's called a direct cremation. So what I have found in my experience with a direct cremation, you won't have a lot of these declinable basic service fees calculated. There won't be an embalming fee in most circumstances. Usually people who have a direct cremation don't even have a viewing. And what ends up happening is the actual cremation fee is this $350 plus a cremation urn usually comes to around $1,000 to $1,500, depending on what part of the country you live in. So if all you're looking for is a very basic cremation without any sort of service, realistically you're looking around $1,000 to $1,500. If you're looking for a mid-range program, maybe there is a urn, but there's no cremation casket, and therefore there wouldn't be an embalming involved. Instead of the $6,000 number, you're looking between $3,000 and $5,000. Now, if you're going to go to the most service available, then yes, this number is what I would consider to be average. One of the things about this particular cost analysis is they don't break down what is realistic amongst people who are actually being cremated. The sole reason people are being cremated is not to pay a number like this much, a lot of people feel, because they feel it's wasteful. They feel like, honestly, the funeral business is a sham, and they want the least done for the least amount. So this number is a bit, in my opinion, inflated. It's more likely that you'll spend between $3,000 and $5,000 if you're going to have a basic service than you would if you were in a position where you were spending, or if you were spending $1,000 to $1,500 if you were having just a basic cremation. So I'll tell you, sharing my experience with my grandfather. My grandfather was a member of a cremation society in Michigan, and he was cremated. He had an urn and a wake at the Rotary Club, which he was a proud member of for decades. And the entire cost of the service was less than $3,000. He was a military veteran from the Korean War. He had the military service procession at the Rotary Club along with bagpipes. Very fitting ending, I would say. And it was not an experience that was very, very expensive. My grandfather grew up in a time where money didn't grow on trees, and he was taught the art of frugal spending, and he just could not justify why one would consider a burial because of the high costs. And so that's why he decided to go the route of a cremation. And my point in sharing this with you is that a lot of this will come down to what you want, how much involvement that you'll have, but understand more realistically than really this particular survey shows, you're looking at about a $3,000 to $5,000 cost on average, depending on what part of the country you live in. So I mentioned a moment ago that my grandfather was a member of a funeral society or cremation society in Michigan. And so what we're going to talk about in this section are the particular types of programs that are available to you and how you can get a cremation policy in effect. So there's three ways primarily. The most common way is through a funeral home. The second common way is through a cremation society, and the third is through a life insurance company. So let's talk about all of the pros and cons of each. So let's say you want to go to your local funeral home. You've had a relationship with them. Maybe they've taken care of family members and friends prior. It's very likely that they can do the same exact thing through the process of planning for a cremation. So what funeral homes do is they offer a traditional way to prearrange a cremation and a funeral. You simply go in, you look at the items, you decide what you want, you create a line item list, signature off on it, locks the prices in place. And many of these funeral homes now, because of consumer demand, just read a statistic the other day that over half of Americans that pass are requesting cremation. And what is slated to continue to be is that trend will grow to being 75% by I believe it's year 2030 to year 2040. The desire to be buried is dwindling year by year. So a lot of funeral homes have in-house crematory services. And when you get one of these policies, they're typically funded through a Preneed life insurance plan. And so what that is, it's a life insurance plan. It lasts for several years to up to 10 years, and it locks the rates in for the different items with the cremation and service. And many times it's actually portable. So if you're snowbird, you live in Michigan, you travel to Florida back and forth, there's corresponding sponsoring funeral homes that will honor that and still give you the service no matter where it is that you end up. The pros of this is you get the pre-planning element with working with a funeral home. So you can sit down and look exactly what you want, how you want it done. And there's a long-term community involvement aspect to this. When you deal with the funeral home, many times these ones have been around for decades, if not more than 100 years. And trust is important when it comes to taking care of your final requirements and wishes. And I think there's an element of a nice aspect to that, to go into a funeral home that has been there forever and does a good job serving the community. The cons of this particular setup is that pre-need planning can be expensive relative to other options. I have seen pre-need plans outprice final expense plans by 2 to 3 times. And in many cases, it's just not a good use of money over the long term, especially if you pay between 5 and 10 years. Also, you tie up all this money into a particular policy. So some people like the idea of having planning and they like to have funding for it, but they don't want to have the whole death benefit go directly to the funeral home. You have to set it up for the funeral home if you get a funeral home policy. It's one of the few drawbacks of the kind of plans that are available. Now, let's take a look at a cremation society. It's very similar to a funeral home setup. A lot of these societies were set up prior to the popularity of a burial prior to the popularity of cremation as it was. So many of them are national or state in scope. So you've got a funeral society or cremation society of Michigan or cremation society of Tennessee. Or you've got a plan like Neptune Society, that's a company that offers services nationally. And it's the same process. It's funded through a pre-need plan and it's portable. Pros being you're part of a community of people who have like-minded beliefs. There is a membership affinity to it. And the cons are it's very similar. You may not want to pay a lump sum payment for the entire thing. We may not want to part with that much money. So if you do that, they can be pricey. And even if you pay over a period of years, it can be a little bit out of the ordinary as far as pricing can go. So let's talk about the third option, which is planning cremation with a life insurance policy. So when you plan your cremation around a life insurance policy, it's unique from the other types of arrangements we discussed. So the idea is very simple. You talk to an agent like myself. You look for a small policy, usually somewhere between $3,000 to $10,000. Less or more, we can do that as well. And then you dedicate a portion of that policy towards the payment of the cremation at the time of death. And usually what happens is when you die, as long as everything's set up correctly, your beneficiary receives whatever amount of coverage you had, and then it's their job to take what portion of that towards the funeral home to pay for those cremation expenses. So the pros of this is that it is the least expensive option. Final expense plans are uniquely designed that we can get a lot of coverage for a fraction of the price that you would get through a membership society program or for a funeral home pre-need plan. The other thing too is a lot of those plans through those other organizations have limitations in coverage. They're not as flexible. If you've got health ailments, you might find that you can't qualify for much to begin with. And if you do, it's going to make you wait for a number of years before the full coverage takes effect. Whereas with final expense insurance companies, especially if you work with someone like myself, a broker, we shop around to try to find the best price and coverage. And many times it can get people approved for full first day coverage that otherwise couldn't. The drawbacks of this kind of plan is there really isn't any inherent planning like you would get at a funeral home or a membership society. So this is important. If you get a plan like this, there's certainly advantages to a life insurance plan taking care of your cremation expenses. But you've got to take the time to then go plan ahead, and typically with the local funeral home or with your loved ones, and describe in writing what it is that you want and how you want it covered so that everybody knows well in advance what to expect. That's one of the biggest advantages with cremation policies is they do this planning inherently within the insurance policy that funds it. So if you get a policy like this or myself, the planning part is up to you. Yeah, at least you got the money, and that does help tremendously. But if you want to plan a certain way and have things happen a certain way, then you have to plan it out on your own time. So let's talk about 3 options for cremation plans using life insurance. So there's 3 options that you can partake in. The first is life pay final expense policies. Next is a multi-year paid up life insurance policy. And the last is a single pay life insurance. So let's talk about details of each. So a life pay insurance policy basically works like it sounds. So first of all, the benefits of these is that you can never have a premium increase. Your coverage can't cancel due to age or health. And in many cases, if you can medically approve, you're covered from the first day. And again, like mentioned in the last slide or two, the premiums are very competitive. So what are the drawbacks? Well, so with a life pay plan, you got to pay for life. So if you're 65 when you take this out and you die at 100, well, you paid 35 years. You cannot ever stop paying. You're going to have to keep paying if you want that amount of coverage in place. And let's take a look at some samples so you can kind of compare what kind of rates you'd be looking at. We're going to look at a 65 and a 75-year-old male and female non-smoker rate. Again, just with the idea of giving you an idea of what this will run for. So in this screen, I've pulled up a $5,000 65-year-old non-smoking male rate for $5,000 first day full coverage. So you can see the price ranges about mid-20s to $30 a month. And then here's some rates for 65-year-old non-smoking females for $5,000 coverage. Upper teens to about mid-20s. Now we're looking at 75-year-old non-smoking males. Of course, a little bit older now, so we're looking at low 40s to low 50s for $5,000. And then same thing here for females. We're looking at somewhere between low 30s to upper 30s for $5,000 for a 75-year-old non-smoking female. Okay, so now we're going to look at multi-year paid-up life insurance policies. They're very much the same kind of policies that you just saw, the same benefits. Never goes up in price, coverage never cancels, and if you medically qualify, you may be approved for first day full coverage. The only difference is that once you reach 10-year or 20-year point, you're done paying for it, and you get to continue to keep the life insurance. So it's like paying off a mortgage, right? So once your mortgage is paid off, you don't get kicked out of your house, you own it. Same idea here, you own the life insurance even after you pay it off. So drawbacks, it's going to cost you a little bit more because you're paying it off and you don't have to potentially face future premiums beyond, you won't have to pay future premiums beyond the 10 or 20 year period. And let me show you some quick samples so you can see what the price difference would be and how it works. Okay, so what you're looking at here is a 65-year-old $5,000 non-smoking male rate, several different companies from about $40 to $60 a month. And here's a $5,000 plan for a female non-smoker 65, mid-30s to mid-50s. And for a male age 75 non-smoker, for a 10-year paid-up plan to 20-year paid-up plans, actually got 7s and 10s, you're looking at somewhere between upper 50s to right at $80 a month. And then for a non-smoking female, 75, for $5,000 of coverage, you're looking for mid-50s to mid to upper 70s. Okay, so now we're looking at a SinglePay life insurance policy. So let's talk about this. Again, same benefits as the multi-pay, paid-up, and life pay plans. The only difference is really you just make one lump sum payment. You never have to make another payment again, and then you're covered for a multiple of that amount of coverage. Pretty interesting product, very useful when you got somebody who doesn't want to pay payments and has a dedicated amount they can put into something like this. The drawbacks of this plan is it's a lump sum payment. You got to tie that money into the plan, and it's put into the life insurance policy. Let me show you some rate samples real quick. So what you're looking at here is a spreadsheet of a paid-up plan option. It's a little hard to understand, but I'm going to kind of describe to you as best as I can using a calculator what you're looking at. If you look here, you'll see the 65-year-old non-smoker male rate is $688.50. So let's say you wanted $5,000 in coverage. What you would end up paying is you'd pay $688 times 5. You would actually end up paying $3,440 for a $5,000 death benefit. So as you can see, you get $1,560 more out of it in coverage for the lump sum payment. So you've turned $3,440 into $5,000 in coverage. And you can do that at even larger multiples or less multiples. For example, females would be, if we do the math there, $617.80 times $5,000 in coverage. You'd be looking at basically a $3,100 payment for a $5,000 benefit. And as you can see, it goes up the scale. Of course, as you get older, the return is less. But if you like the idea of getting an advantage here where you don't have to necessarily pay in more to get coverage, this is a really cool product that's super helpful. Okay, so my final thoughts here on what cremation plans actually work best. So these are all really good options. It's not necessarily that there's one option, whether it's the funeral home or the cremation society or just a life insurance plan dedicated to cremation that's actually better than another. It's just whatever is best for you based on what you want to accomplish and as well as what your budgetary concerns are. My experience dealing with people on a fixed income, cost is the biggest determinant of whether one uses a Preneed, cremation society, or funeral plan, or a final expense policy. A lot of the business I get comes to me because they've seen some of this and they just can't potentially fit it into the budget, or they don't want to pay a lump sum payment for it. And either way, if your goal is to completely plan ahead for each item and have a dedicated policy, truly the society or funeral home plan is going to work best for you. I don't have any caveats saying that. If money is not so much of a concern, but your biggest concern is pre-planning, that's the best way. If you're more of the type that's a little sensitive on budget, or maybe you want to stay in control of who receives the money, you want something more than just a cremation plan, then a life insurance policy is a great idea, a final expense plan. So you can get enough to take care of the cremation. And then you can have extra for whether it's replacing income for your spouse, leaving a legacy of love to a daughter or a son or a grandchild, or just making sure any final arrangements are taken care of that are just not considered. A life insurance plan, a standalone plan, has a lot more flexibility than what you'll get through a cremation society or a funeral home. So final steps, if you decide the life insurance element is something that is useful to you and you'd like to see what it is that I have to offer, here's all you need to do. Just go to buylifeinsuranceforburial.com. I'll be happy to give you a free quote. Or just give me a call at 888-626-0439. You'll speak to me live. Leave a voicemail if you don't get me. I'm very commonly on the phone with people trying to help them out. And if you liked what you've seen here, please leave a comment, thumbs up the video. And I do hope that you find it useful. My name is David Duford at buylifeinsuranceforburial.com. Thank you so much for watching.